Now, we're going to consider portions of the 15th chapter of 2 Samuel tonight. So that means we've skipped a few chapters in there. We have, there's some drama in David's family because we had studied through the 12th chapter. And there's some conflict within the family members. He had a big family. There are 18 or 19 named sons. And we have so many of them that we know are linked to particular moms, but then we have some we don't know who their moms are. And the only reason we have this 18 or 19 is there's two Eliphylets. And it's hard to tell if that's the same guy or if there's two of them that have the same name because they appear to be separate. But it's hard to say. If it was important, God would make it clear. But out of 8 wives, and these are all kids that have to receive an inheritance, and his sons all end up with government positions. So they're not only a part of the family, but they're also part of the government structure, and they work in various areas. There is a lot of drama. Some of it can be exciting. Some of it is heartbreaking. And we just won't go through all the details, but we do have Ammon has molested his sister. By that I mean they all had the same dad, but they had different moms. Half sister, I guess you would say. And Absalom is the older brother there, and so he never forgets that. He kind of tucks that away, and there'll come a day that he's going to put Ammon in his place. You have Absalom then taking things into his hands and actually avenging his sister and killing his half-brother. He flees to a city of refuge. So there's this division, and David won't send for him. He said, well, that's it. And yet he loved Absalom because Absalom was the one who looked more like a king than anybody else. Because when you study Absalom's life, he was tall, and he was handsome, and he was strong, and he was very erudite in his speech. And it talks about his long hair, that he'd let that stuff grow for a whole year, and then they weighed it, and it was so many pounds of hair at the end of every year. So Absalom is more well known of the sons than many of the others. And we have Joab, the commanding general of the army, trying to get Absalom and David reconciled. And remember, when we study this, Joab is one of David's nephews. So, this whole bunch is related. Remember, they're the 3 sons of his sister. They're all part. One of them's already deceased in battle. It's hard for us to try and keep up with all of it. You get a big family. There's just a lot going on trying to keep up with it. But David does agree with Joab finally that Absalom should come back. Absalom comes back. But at first, he won't talk to him. He says he can come back to the city, but I'm not going to see him. And that took a while before they finally reconciled. And then, things were restored. So we think at that point, well, it looks like things are getting better. But then we have this testimony here. Absalom always had his eye on being king. And he thinks that Dad's he's hanging around too long. It's time for a new administration. It's time to overthrow his dad. And so he's quietly behind the scenes looking for people in the army, people in the government, people among the population, people who have grievances, trying to build this coalition. And that's explained. So we pick it up here. We're in 2 Samuel chapter 15. It says, after this, it happened that Absalom provided himself with chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. Now Absalom would rise early and stand beside the way to the gate. And so it was, whenever anyone who had a lawsuit came to the king for a decision, that Absalom would call to him and say, "What city are you from?" And he would say, your servant is from such and such a tribe in Israel. Then Absalom would say to him, look, your case is good and right, but there is no deputy of the king to hear you. Moreover, Absalom would say, oh, that I were made judge in the land, and everyone who has any suit or cause would come to me. Then I would give him justice. And so it was that whenever anyone came near to bow down to him, that he would put out his hand and take him and kiss him. In this manner, Absalom acted toward all Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. Now, as we studied David, David rode a white mule. And most of his sons rode a white mule too. That may sound funny to us. I always think of Festus, riding his mule there. But we have, that was the kingly thing to do. That was the way David did things. It was in agreement with Scripture. Remember when we studied those verses in Deuteronomy that one thing the king was not supposed to do, he wasn't supposed to collect many horses unto himself, and he wasn't supposed to collect a lot of silver and gold to himself, and he was never to lead the people back into the Egyptian ways, and he was never to take them backward spiritually. He was always to move them forward. He was to copy that book or have it copied, the book of Moses, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, and they reference all of that as the law of Moses, but he was to have his own copy. And he was supposed to study it every day. And he was supposed to know the heart of God. And that's why, David did some things right and he did some things terribly wrong. Here we see Absalom deliberately going in a different direction. That's old-fashioned. That's the way the old folks do it. That's it. None of this white mule stuff. So what does he do? He provides himself with chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him, to let folks know that he's coming. Here's Absalom. So this is his the way he introduces himself to the people of the capital, and they get to know him and who he is. And he always is campaigning, and so he tells the people what they want to hear. He doesn't speak the truth in love. He just finds out what they want to hear, and so he flatters them. And just makes mention, I know you're waiting your turn, because remember at the gate, it was where you gathered for judgment. Anything that couldn't be settled there went on to the king for the king's judgment. And so he would meet, and he no matter what their complaint was, he was in agreement. They were right. They had been wronged. If he was the one making the decisions, he'd give them justice. And he just kind of happened to mention, they thought, boy, this is a nice guy. And if they would start to bow down to him, he'd take them in. And today would say, he'd give them a hug or a good handshake. It's here, it says he'd give them a kiss. But, there's none of that. We're just good to meet you. Where are you from? And he builds this coalition. Now it takes some time. But he is actively, his goal is to try and steal the hearts of the people away from his dad. And so what you want to do is point out, he wants to point out the king's faults, and he wants to butter the people up and say that what they think is right. And if he gets in, if he's ever got some authority, boy, he would give them justice. He just wanted to know. He couldn't do anything about it now. But man, I feel for you. And if maybe there'll come a day that things will be different. So people are very fickle, aren't they? And people will kind of jump around to whoever's going to give them, quote, the best deal, rather than in thinking a little deeper about things. Since you can't see people, you have to spend some time and get to know people. By saying you can't see people, the real person is inside a body. And the body doesn't tell you a whole bunch. A lot of people think a body tells you all sorts of things. And that's why Absalom, being handsome, boy, they thought that being taller, being more athletic, having more money, man, he rides in chariots. And yet he appears to be such a humble guy, a friendly fellow, wants to know your name, wants to listen to your problems. Do you understand? While he is spending all this time winning the hearts of the people, he doesn't hold a job. I mean, he's living on, he's the king's son. The king's busy. He's got things to do. There's work to be done. This guy's got the time to go around and to, he's got to do it on somebody else's dime, doesn't he? Somebody's got to be behind this thing. But this was what was going on. And he used flattery. Flattery, we are told, is a form of hatred and can actually entrap people if they believe what you say about them. So there is genuine praise that we are expected to do. I wrote an article on it just a few weeks ago in the Valley Views. And it is right to praise in the right way, to encourage folks and to build them up and to give them an attaboy and hang in there. And I'm proud of you. And, don't give up now. There is true praise that is very biblical and it's very sound. But flattery, the purpose is to try and control people. And behind flattery is the person who flatters wants something from you. True praise is given expecting nothing in return. Nothing in return. You and I, because we've heard so much flattery in our culture, we always have in the back of our mind, if a deal sounds too good to be true, it's not. It's a bad deal. There's something wrong there. And we also always think, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Somebody starts promising all sorts of stuff. It's like, what is the motive behind here? So true praise expects nothing in return. But flattery, they want something from you. And that's the way he lived. And so we have that example. It says, in this manner, Absalom acted toward all Israel who came to the king for judgment. So anybody who is coming, this is a good place to campaign. He gets to talk to them before they go in. And, the king's going to rule for some of them, and some he's not. But whatever way it happened, Absalom's always going to be their buddy. Oh, I'm so sorry it didn't go the right way. If I ever had a little authority, it'd be different. Or, man, I'm glad that he saw that your case was a good one and that you won, and I'm happy for you. You see, all he's trying to do is steal the people's hearts, specifically away from David, because he wants to be king. Verse 7, now it came to pass after 40 years that Absalom said to the king, please let me go to Hebron and pay the vow which I made to the Lord. For your servant took a vow while I dwelt at Geshur in Syria, saying, if the Lord indeed brings me back to Jerusalem, then I will serve the Lord. And the king said to him, go in peace. So he arose and went to Hebron. Then Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then you shall say, Absalom reigns in Hebron. And with Absalom went 200 men invited from Jerusalem, and they went along innocently and did not know anything. Then Absalom sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor, from his city, from Gilo, while he offered sacrifices. And the conspiracy grew strong, for the people with Absalom continually increased in number. Now, when you get to verse 7 there, you go, and it came to pass after 40 years. You go, 40 years from what? That number just seems all out of place right there. What are you referring to? What are you talking about? Now, that's a good translation. That's the way it's supposed to be. But you'll find some translations, they'll try and say, well, we think we ought to misprint. I think they're talking 4. I think they'll have some other. And you might have that in there. They may, but 40 is the correct. And it makes sense if you know the context. But it sure gets your attention at first. What are you talking about? And so when you work backward from this point, and that's why we've been trying to give people's ages and stuff, okay, at this particular point, we're talking about 40 years ago. What happened? 40 years ago is when the people's hearts were turned to David. When did that happen? That happened when he slew Goliath and he led them as a young man in battle. Okay, 40 years previous, the hearts of the people had turned to David. And this is based upon slaying of Goliath, serving in the army, being completely, victorious. And so you remember Saul would get real upset when he saw that, because when they were singing victory songs, Saul has slain his hundreds and David his thousands, there was always this bigger. If they sang for Saul that he had his thousands that he slain, David his 10,000. In other words, he was getting more praise from the people in their victory songs and in their adoration than Saul was. And remember, Saul was very upset about it. Didn't bother Jonathan. They understand people are fickle. This will pass. They'll bless you one day. They'll curse you the next day. They'll vote you in. They'll vote you out. They'll bless you, and then they'll dump you. People are fickle. And so folks who like to manipulate people, they will prey on their emotions. And the 40 years previous, this is what's being referenced. David had experienced something like this. He didn't do it deliberate, but the people's hearts went over to him. Now we have Absalom, 40 years after that event, and he desires to win the people's adoration and their hearts. So he goes to Hebron. Why Hebron? Hey, that's where David started. Remember, he reigned Judah from Hebron. And 7 years. And then he goes and he conquers what becomes Jerusalem, the city of David, for that next 33 years. Then he rules all of Israel, not just one tribe, but all of Israel. So he's taking things from history. How do you, first off, you need to win the people's hearts. And now he's going back to the place where he had been accepted, David first. Now Absalom wants the same thing for himself. And he feels he's at a point now that he has enough that are in the government and enough that are in the army and enough, that are for him, that he can pull this thing off. He tells a lie as far as what his motives are. And David said, fine, go ahead and go. If you've made a vow unto the Lord, then that's, go. You need to take care of that. He said, your servant took a vow while I dwelt at Geshur in Syria, saying, if the Lord indeed brings me back to Jerusalem, then I will serve the Lord. Well, he's serving himself. But he knows how to use the God's name to sway people. He knows how to use God's name to make a buck, and he knows how to use God's name to motivate people. And it's not love for their souls. It is for power. He wants to be empowered. He wants to overthrow his dad. He wants to overthrow David. And it's time for a younger generation to step up and to move forward. The king said to him, go in peace. So he arose and went to Hebron. Then Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then you shall say, Absalom reigns in Hebron. He says, when I announce this conspiracy and when I'm crowned king, we need to get the word out as fast as possible among all the tribes. So we'll use trumpets to announce this along the way, and you declare that Absalom reigns in Hebron. And with Absalom went 200 men invited from Jerusalem, and they went along innocently and did not know anything. So they just think, it's kind of a celebrating time. It's a party time. We've all been invited to this conference. They didn't plan on overthrowing the government. It says they went innocently, but that was the event that was being planned, the overthrow of David's government. It says, then Absalom sent for Ahithophel, the Gileonite, David's counselor from his city, from Gilo, while he offered sacrifices. And the conspiracy grew strong, for the people with Absalom continually increased in number. Now, Ahithophel, in all these lists of names that we have, remember, Ahithophel is a trusted counselor, an older man who is a trusted counselor of David. He is the father of Eliam. And we're going to discover that in a list. It's still out ahead of us. It's in the 23rd chapter. But when you start comparing lists, and we have a list back in the 11th chapter of Bathsheba's heritage, what it goes from is Ahithophel, and then his son Eliam, and then Bathsheba. So Bathsheba, you discover by comparing those lists, is the granddaughter of Ahithophel. And Ahithophel actually goes over to Absalom to become his chief counselor. David even writes a psalm about it. Just how can this be? How can this happen? But it was linked to David's actions toward Bathsheba and the murder of her husband. And Ahithophel never forgot that, and so it was embittered. And at first you and I don't understand, because you start going through those lists and those names, and it's like, why do I need to know this? And Lord, please help me to remember, when I need, where to go back to. Because all you know is, well, God knows a whole bunch of people. He knows your name. He knows where you live. He knows what's going on. God knows everything. You can get that out of those lists pretty quick. But after a little bit and starting comparing, you realize, these things are beginning to fall into place, especially when it talks who's related to who and who's brother or sister or who are cousins or who. So you don't catch that first time through. But Ahithophel is going to now give his allegiance to Absalom. And he's going to take it away. And he's a very wise man. And many times he had given David very sound counsel, good counsel. And David had been blessed. So it was a real hurt in David's heart when one of his very top counselors goes over to Absalom. Verse 13 says, "Now a messenger came to David saying, 'The hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom.' So David said to all his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, 'Arise, let us flee, or we shall not escape from Absalom. Make haste to depart, lest he overtake us suddenly and bring disaster upon us and strike the city with the edge of the sword.' And the king's servants said to the king, 'We are your servants, ready to do whatever my lord the king commands.' Then the king went out with all his household after him, but the king left 10 women, concubines, to keep the house. And the king went out with all the people after him and stopped at the outskirts. Then all his servants passed before him, and all the Cherethites and all the Pelethites and all the Gittites, 600 men who had followed him from Gath, passed before the king." And each of these have something to do with his bodyguard. Some are warriors to guard him, and some are those who execute justice on his behalf if he has to pass that. But this is a large bodyguard. It says, "Then the king said to Ittai the Gittite, 'Why are you also going with us? Return and remain with the king, for you are a foreigner and also an exile from your own place. In fact, you came only yesterday or recently. So should I make you wander up and down with us today, since I go to I know not where? Return, take your brethren back. Mercy and truth be with you.' But Ittai answered the king and said, 'As the Lord lives, and as my lord the king lives, surely in whatever place my lord the king shall be, whether in death or life, even there also your servant will be.' And David said to Ittai, 'Go and cross over.' Then Ittai the Gittite and all his men and all the little ones who were with him crossed over. And all the country wept with a loud voice, and all the people crossed over. And the king himself also crossed over the brook Kidron, and all the people crossed over toward the way of the wilderness." So they're going out of the town. They have to go down into the valley, cross the brook of Kidron, then you'll go back up on the other side, Mount of Olives area. It's all we know it from a New Testament perspective more than an Old Testament perspective, but then on out into the wilderness, and he's fleeing. The reason he is fleeing is he believes that this will cause a civil war and there will be many deaths, and therefore if he can get out of the way, it will spare a lot of lives in Jerusalem. So he encourages many who want to stay, Some insist on going. And here we have a newcomer. And he has only been there a short period of time. I mean, just a matter of days, it appears. And he's come quite a distance, but he's brought people to be a part of the move of God in David's life and to be a part of what God is doing in Israel. And his mind is not changed because it's become dangerous. He never thought that something like this was going on. He never guessed that there could be a conspiracy going on, that there was a civil war about to erupt. But he says, no, in other words, he had heard from the Lord. He knew why they were there. He says, wherever you're going, I'm going. It's not Jerusalem that I'm here for, and it's not this hilltop, and it's not Mount Zion or anything. God's called me to help you to be successful in what you're doing. And so I'm going with you. And David wanted, let him know, this is not going to be easy. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what the future is. But he had determined in his heart, and here you have one who is a foreigner, who has the right example, the one who is following the leading of the Spirit of God when own family members are trying to overthrow the government at this time. So God honors this man's faithfulness, and that he is a man of honor, and he is a man of his word. And so that's how we get to meet him here. And let me read just a little bit, and then we're out of time here. So as they've left the city, and you notice he leaves 10 of his girlfriends in charge. Concubines, also, semi-wives. And they take off. It says there was Zadok, he's a faithful priest, also, and all the Levites with him, bearing the ark of the covenant of God, and they set down the ark of God, and Abiathar went up until all the people had finished crossing over from the city. And then the king said to Zadok, carry the ark of God back into the city. If I find favor, remember the ark is in the tabernacle of David at this time. It's not in the tabernacle of Moses. It's in the tabernacle of David on Mount Zion, right behind David's house, His palace is on Mount Zion, right in his backyard, tabernacle of David. And so they went, and you have these, Abiathar and Zadok shared the high priest's position under the administration of David, starting way back in the wilderness and up to this point. So the Levites did it in the right way. They were the right ones, and they had bundled it up and got it protected and moved. There wasn't anything unbiblical that they had done, but they were setting the wrong precedent, and David understood that. So here's why he sends them back. The king said to Zadok, carry the ark of God back into the city. Verse 25, if I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me back and show me both it and his dwelling place. But if he says thus, I have no delight in you, here I am, let him do to me as seems good to him. So David threw himself on the providence of God, on the mercy of God. He said, I'm resigned to your will. I don't know how this is going to come out. I'm counting on you. The king also said to Zadok the priest, are you not a seer? In other words, a prophet. Return to the city in peace, and your 2 sons with you, Ahimaaz your son, and Jonathan the son of Abiathar. See, I will wait in the plains of the wilderness until the word comes from you to inform me. Therefore Zadok and Abiathar carried the ark of God back to Jerusalem, and they remained there. So David went up by the ascent of the Mount of Olives, and wept as he went up, and he had his head covered and went barefoot, and all the people who were with him covered their heads and went up, weeping as they went up. They were in mourning. Now David humbles himself publicly. He humbles himself before man. He humbles himself before God. He's still issuing orders as he has authority. It says, then someone told David, saying, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. And David said, O Lord, I pray, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. He said, Lord, I can't believe that. I mean, this is kind of the last crushing blow. My top counselor, my oldest counselor, the wisest man, one of the wisest that I have in the administration, has gone over. And he says, Lord, you're going to have to intervene. Because this man gives wise advice. This man gives winning advice. And you're going to have to confuse it. You're going to have to do something that they won't listen to him. You're going to have to intervene. Here's the point. When he sends the ark back, and it is the correct thing to do, the king is to follow God's presence. God does not follow the king. You see, do you understand? The king is fleeing. That doesn't mean God flees. He said, no. He says, I've got to get out of here. But I want you to go back. I want to put that back, in the tabernacle of David. The king is to follow God's presence. God doesn't follow the king. You've got to make, who's doing the leading here? And that's why he says, if God is with me, I will come back. He'll work behind the scenes on this thing, and I'll get to come back. But if not, may his will be done. And it was a very sad time, because they didn't know what was going to happen. And the people with them, they're all in mourning, as they're fleeing. But then he told his Abiathar and Zadok, and they're both, very faithful priests. They said, you guys keep your eyes and ears open. Your sons are brave young men. Your sons will be able to follow me out into the wilderness. And if you've got something that I need to know, you be my eyes and ears. And if there's something I need to know, you tell your sons. You send your sons, that next generation stepping up. So here we have some of the next generation who remain faithful to David, while we have many of the next generation going after Absalom. And you just kind of leave it there. And I'll just tell you, chapters like that have such application for the day and age we live in. It is unbelievable. I mean, it's just more up to date than the newspaper, isn't it? Well, we've come to our end of our time tonight. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you that you knew how to take care of David, and you knew how to take care of what was going on, and you knew his heart, and you still had work for him to do. And though there was an attempted coup and there was a civil war that was attempted, Lord, you were able to turn things around. And we just say thank you. Sometimes we live in a time when it just looks like everything's out of control, but we're always keeping our eyes on you. We always look to you for guidance and direction on a daily basis. It's important for us to know, what you're doing and how you're leading. So our eyes are on you, and we follow you, Jesus. We don't place our faith in the institutions of men or the politics of men. We keep our faith in you, Jesus, and you have never let us down. It's in your name we do pray. Amen.